I could see that Lincoln was trying to time a run forward when the bow was out of the water. He made a couple of false starts, then ran slipping on the wet deck, disappearing into the access hole for the forward torpedo room escape hatch. The bow plunged underwater, and I found myself sucking air as I imagined the cold salt water swirling around me. It wasn't me, though, it was Lincoln. I gripped the top of the sail as I waited for the bow to swing up, hoping that Lincoln wouldn't panic. What we saw next could have been a clip from one of those old Keystone Cops movies. Lincoln was flailing water so hard that it looked like he had 40 arms and 40 legs. It was only then that I realized that Lincoln had joined the Navy, but he didn't know how to swim. When he finally gathered a foothold, the half-drowned seaman exploded up out of that hole like a Polaris missile and ran back to the conning tower just as fast as his wet leather soles could carry him. Ensign Ball and Geronimo and I laughed for a good 10 minutes. In fact, every time we saw Lincoln for the next 2 days, we would burst out laughing. Lincoln didn't think it was funny and didn't miss a chance to slug us every time we laughed. Lincoln went below. Geronimo and I began the unending task of sweeping the horizon from bow to stern. Then the sky from horizon to zenith, and then back to the horizon from bow to stern. Again and again, and then a pause to rest our eyes and chat for a few minutes. I asked Ensign Ball to call for some hot coffee. As he bent over the 1MC, I turned, raising my binoculars to my eyes just in time to see a huge disk rise from beneath the ocean, water streaming from the air around it, tumble lazily on its axis, and disappear into the clouds. My heart beat wildly. I tried to talk but couldn't. Then I changed my mind and decided I didn't want to say that anyways. I had seen a flying saucer the size of an aircraft carrier come right out of the ocean and fly into the clouds. I looked around quickly to see if anyone else had seen it. Ensign Ball was still bending over the 1MC. He was ordering coffee, and Geronimo was looking down the starboard side aft. I was torn between my duty to report what I had seen and the knowledge that if I did, no one would believe me. As I looked out over the ocean, I saw only sky, clouds, and water. It was as if nothing had happened. I almost thought I had dreamed it. Ensign Ball straightened up, turned towards Geronimo, and said the coffee was on the way up. I looked back towards a spot about 15 degrees relative off the port bow and about 2.5 nautical miles distant. Nothing, not even a hint of what had happened. Ensign Ball, I said, I thought I saw something about 15 degrees relative off the bow, but I lost it. Can you help me look over that area? Ensign Ball turned, raising his glasses to eye level. I didn't know it at the time, but Geronimo had heard me and turned to look. He was happy that something had broken the monotony. I was just lifting the binoculars off my chest when I saw it. The giant saucer shape plunged out of the clouds, tumbled, and pushed the water before it, opened up a hole in the ocean, and disappeared from view. It was incredible. This time I had seen it with my naked eyes, and its size in comparison with the total view was nothing short of astounding. Ensign Ball stood in shock, his binoculars in his hand, his mouth agape. Geronimo yelled, "Holy shit! What the? Hey, did you guys see that?" Ensign Ball turned and, looking right at me with the most incredulous look on his face, said in a low voice, "This had to happen on my watch." He turned quickly, pressing the override on the 1MC, and yelled, "Captain to the bridge! Captain to the bridge!" As an afterthought, he pressed the switch again and yelled, "Somebody get a camera up here!" The captain surged up the ladder with the quartermaster on his heels. Chief Quartermaster Quintero had the ship's 35mm camera slung around his neck. The captain stood patiently while Ensign Ball tried to describe what he had seen. He glanced at us, and we both nodded in affirmation. That was enough for the captain. He called sonar, who during the excitement had reported contact underwater at the same bearing. The captain announced into the 1MC, "This is the captain. I have the con." The reply came back instantly from the helm. "Aye, aye, sir." I knew that the helmsman was passing the word in the control room that the captain had personally taken control of the boat. I also knew that the rumors were probably flying through the vessel. The captain called down and ordered someone to closely monitor the radar. His command was instantly acknowledged. As the five of us stood gazing out over the sea, the same ship, or one exactly like it, rose slowly, turned in the air, tilted at an angle, and then vanished. I saw the chief snapping pictures out of the corner of my eye. This time I had 3 images from which to draw conclusions. It was a metal machine, one that there was no doubt whatsoever. It was intelligently controlled. Of that I was equally sure. It was a dull color, kind of like pewter. There was no lights, there was no glow. I thought I had seen a row of what looked like portholes, but could not be certain. Radar reported contact at the same bearing and gave us a range of 3 nautical miles. The range was right on. As the craft had moved towards the general direction that we were headed, we watched repeatedly as the strange craft re-entered the water and then subsequently rose into the clouds over and over again until finally we knew that it was gone for good. The episode lasted about 10 minutes. Before leaving the bridge, the captain took the camera from the chief and instructed each of us not to talk to anyone about what we had seen. He told us the incident was classified and we were not to discuss it, not even amongst ourselves. We acknowledged his order. The captain and the chief left the bridge. Ensign Ball stepped to the 1MC and, pressing the overswitch switch, announced, "This is Ensign Ball. The captain has left the bridge. I have the con." The reply, "Aye, aye, sir," quickly followed. Those of us who had witnessed the UFO were not allowed to go ashore after we had berthed in Pearl. Even those of us who didn't have the duty were told we had to stay aboard. After about 2 hours, a commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence boarded. He went directly to the captain's stateroom. It wasn't long before we were called to wait in the passageway outside the captain's door. Ensign Ball was first called. After about 10 minutes, he came out and went into the wardroom. He looked shaken. I was next. When I entered the stateroom, the commander was holding my service record in his hands. He wanted to know why I had gone from the Air Force into the Navy. I told him the whole story, and he laughed when I said that after putting off the Navy for fear of chronic seasickness, I hadn't been seasick yet. Suddenly a mask dropped over his face, and looking me directly in the eyes, he said, "What did you see out there?" "I believe it was a flying saucer, sir," I answered. The man began to visibly shake, and he screamed obscenities at me. He threatened to put me in the brig for the rest of my life. I thought he was going to stop yelling, but as suddenly as he began, he stopped. I was confused. I had answered his question truthfully, yet I was threatened with prison. I was not afraid, but I was not very confident either. I figured I had better take another tack. 18 years with my father and 4 years in the Air Force had taught me something. Number 1 was that officers just do not lose control like that, ever. Number 2 was that if my answer had elicited that explosion, then the next thing out of my mouth had better be something entirely different. Number 3 was that his response had been an act of kindness to get me to arrive at exactly that conclusion. "Let's start all over again," he said. "What did you see out there?" "Nothing, sir," I answered. "I didn't see a damn thing, and I'd like to get out of here just as soon as possible." A smile spread over his face, and the captain looked relieved. "Are you sure, Cooper?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "I'm sure." "You're a good sailor, Cooper," he said. "The Navy needs men like you. You'll go far with the Navy." He then asked me to read several pieces of paper that all said the same thing, only with different words. I read that if I ever talked about what it was that I didn't see, I could be fined up to $10,000 and imprisoned for up to 10 years or both. In addition, I could lose all pay and allowances due or ever to become due. He asked me to sign a piece of paper stating that I understood the laws and regulations that I had just read governing the safeguard of classified information relating to the national security. By signing, I agreed never to communicate in any manner any information regarding the incident with anyone. I was dismissed, and boy, was I glad to get out of there. Not long after that incident, I devolunteered from submarines. I was transferred to the USS Tombigbee, AOG-11. The Tombigbee was a gasoline tanker. It was more dangerous than the sub. The captain was crazy, and the crew was a combination of idiots and misfits. I once had to draw my pistol while I was petty officer of the watch to prevent an officer from being attacked by a seaman. The Tombigbee collided in the dead of night with a destroyer in the Malachi Channel, and several men died when the destroyer was almost cut in half. Every day aboard that ship was exactly like a scene right out of Mr. Roberts. I was struck for quartermaster, navigation specialist, and managed to advance to the rank of second-class petty officer, despite the obvious obstacles. I made 2 Westpac tours aboard the Tombigbee. They included a total of 12 months off the coast of Vietnam. We came under machine gun fire while anchored off of Chu Ly. We had to do an emergency breakaway and leave the harbor. All we needed was one tracer round in one of the tanks, and kaboom, it would have been all over. The Viet Cong gunner probably got busted because the stupid jerk missed the whole damn ship. How can he miss a whole ship? The only other time I felt threatened was when we went up to a small outpost at the DMZ called Quai Vet. It was a vision right out of hell. Quai Vet sat on the southern bank at the river mouth of the Thak Han River. We rode at anchor and pumped fuel ashore through a bottom ley line. Every night we could see the tracers from the firefights raging up and down the river and along the DMZ. It was a real hot spot. Every once in a while, Viet Cong or NVA rockets would slam into the camp. We would perform an emergency breakaway and put to sea until all clear was sounded. Everything was cool until our wacko captain decided we were going to enter the river mouth. Did you ever try to put a pencil through the eye of a needle? That's about comparable to what we did. I'll never know how we got that big ship through the narrow mouth of that river with no navigational references whatsoever. We dropped anchor mid-channel, and the captain backed the ship right up to the beach and dropped the stern anchor into the sand. There we sat, a great big target full of gasoline. We were helpless in the mouth of a narrow river, with 3 anchors out, right in the middle of one of the hottest combat zones in Vietnam. That night, several men in the crew wrote letters to the Chief of Naval Operations requesting an immediate transfer. No one slept. I don't know why the enemy didn't send in the rockets, but they didn't. I knew then that God must keep a special watch over fools. The next day we set to sea and started for Pearl. The captain was relieved for incompetence later that year. Then I was transferred to school. I didn't know what school I had drawn. It turned out to be the Naval Security and Intelligence School for Internal Security Specialist, NEC N545. The general training prepared me to set up security parameters, secure installations and buildings, and safeguard classified information. My training included special weapons, booby trap identification, and disarming the detection of bugs, phone taps, transmitters, and many other subjects. I was specifically trained to prepare and conduct Pacific Area intelligence briefings. From the day I reported to school in 1968 until I left the Navy, I worked off and on for naval security and intelligence. Upon graduating, I was transferred to Vietnam. I had volunteered over a year before because I figured that my chances were better in the war than they were on that screwed up gasoline tanker. This was the first good news I'd had since leaving boot camp. I really wanted to fight for my country. I wasn't to find out what a real fool I was until a few years later. I landed at Da Nang and was bused to Camp Carter, the headquarters for Naval Security and Intelligence in I Corps. I was interviewed by Captain Carter, the commanding officer. The names turned out to be a coincidence. Captain Carter asked me if I thought I would make a good patrol boat captain, and I told him that I would. What else could I tell him? I thought he was joking when he told me I would have command of a boat and a crew. He wasn't, and I did. Lieutenant Dewey at the Harbor Patrol, a division of Naval Intelligence, allowed me to handpick a crew. He gave me first choice of 4 45 picket boats that had just been uploaded from the deck of a freighter. I and my new crew spent 3 days going every inch of that boat. We adjusted and fine-tuned everything. We sanded and painted. One of the seamen even hung curtains in the after cabin. We checked and double-checked the engines. My gunner's mate, CMG-3 Robert G. Barron, checked out weapons, and we began to arm our vessel. I've got to tell you the truth. Just looking at all those guns scared the shit out of me. I vowed right then and there that I would be the best damn captain that ever commanded a combat vessel in wartime. I learned to exist on only 2 to 3 hours of sleep out of 24 and never ate until I knew that my crew had been fed. We spent a lot of spooky nights patrolling the Da Nang River. One night, a rocket hit the ammo dump at the river's edge near the Da Nang Bridge, and it really looked as if the world was coming to an end. Another time, we engaged the enemy in the cove at Point Isabella near the marine fuel farm and probably saved their butts. That engagement was reported in the Stars and Stripes, the Armed Forces newspaper in Vietnam. The worst moments came, however, not from Charlie, but from Mother Nature. A full-blown typhoon roared across the Gulf of Tonkin. To save the boats, we put to sea. The angels must have been laughing. What a sight we must have made. I maneuvered our boat in between 2 giant cargo ships riding at anchor off Red Beach, and learned quickly what fear was really about. The wind was blowing so hard that none of us could go on deck. That meant that the 2 of us in the pilot house were stuck on watch, and the men trapped in the after cabin had to man the hand pumps. The windows in the pilot house blew out and the rain felt like knives hitting our skin. Water poured in, and I prayed that the men on the pumps could not become exhausted. I could barely just make out the 2 tankers. I could tell they were in more trouble than we were. When we were on the crest of the mountainous waves, we looked down onto the tops of the ships. When we were in the trough, we seemed to be in danger of their crashing down upon us. One of the freighters snapped a cable and steamed slowly out of the harbor. The next morning, the storm calmed and we moved into the river. Debris was floating down, and we had to play dodge the tree trunks until we spotted a sheltered pier in front of the press club. We carefully pulled the boat alongside, tied fast to the pier, then collapsed from exhaustion. After a while, we drew straws to see who would remain on watch with me. The rest went into the press club. After a couple of hours, the crew returned and we went in. It was like nothing was going on outside. Reporters sat around drinking or eating. All around flowed conversation and laughter. We ordered a huge meal, signed Lieutenant Dewey's name to the check, and then went out to the boat. I don't know whose name the other guy signed, but none of us had any money. I don't even know if Lieutenant Dewey ever got the bill. I do know that it was one of the best damn meals that we ever had in that country. The next 2 days were spent in repairing the boat, cleaning the weapons, and checking everything. Then we went to the club, got stone drunk, and slept for damn near the whole other day. Bob Barron volunteered for Cuvette. I begged him to stay with us. Maybe we could all go up later together. He couldn't wait. He had to have action. We promised each other that if one of us bought the farm, the other would drink a bottle of scotch in memory, then break the bottle on the rocks. Don't ask me what that was all about. Men who think they might die at any given moment do stupid things, and I was no different than most. About 3 weeks later, we learned that Bob's boat had gone on TWO Lima patrol on the Thakan River one night and had never returned. No radio transmissions were ever heard, and for a while no bodies were found. Then one by one they popped up to the surface along the bank. It was a long time before we ever found the boat. When we did, it was twisted up like a pretzel. I say we because after I drank the bottle of scotch and I broke out on the rocks, I forced the issue and was transferred to Dong Ha River Support Group at Cuvette. It was now a personal war. They had killed a part of me. Bob had been my friend. His name is on the Vietnam Memorial. My boat engaged the enemy more times than any other boat that ever patrolled that river. We kept the enemy off the river, and I never lost another man. I was awarded the Naval Achievement Medal with Combat V, the Naval Commendation Medal with Combat V, and the Combat Action Ribbon. Our whole organization was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the Naval Unit Citation, and each of us accumulated various other minor awards, ribbons, and medals. Here's like super young little handsome Bill Cooper. Look at him. He's so little. so young. That's him on his patrol boat. One thing I didn't like about Vietnam was that it was very difficult to maintain unit cohesion and morale when you had proven and trusted men leaving all the time at staggered intervals and green unproven men arriving to take their place. I noticed that I felt like I was deserting my crew when I was rotated home. I tried to extend my tour of duty, but they had already decided to phase out our forces and turn the war over to the Vietnamese. If I had extended a month earlier, I was told I could have stayed. My attitude at that point was a smoldering "screw it." The whole time that I was in Vietnam, especially on the DMZ, I had noticed that there was a lot of UFO activity. We had individual 24-hour crypto code sheets that we used to encode messages. But because of the danger that one of them could be captured any time, we used special code words for sensitive information. UFOs, I was told, were definitely sensitive information. I learned exactly how sensitive when all the people of an entire village disappeared after UFOs were seen hovering above their huts. I learned that both sides had fired upon the UFOs, and they had blasted back with a mysterious blue light. Rumors floated around that UFOs had kidnapped and mutilated 2 army soldiers, then dropped them in the bush. No one knew how much of this was true, but the fact that the rumors persisted made me tend to think that there was at least some truth in them. I found out later that most of those rumors were true. I eventually found myself back in Hawaii. This time it was shore duty at the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet at Makalapa, a hill above Pearl Harbor. I had carried a secret security clearance in the Air Force, and secret was required for submarines. When I checked into the Fleet Administration Unit, I was asked to fill out papers for another clearance. I did as I was asked. I remember that one of the questions asked if I had ever belonged to any fraternal organizations. I looked down the list, circled the De Molloy Society, and answered in the affirmative. I was assigned to the Operational Status Office, OPSTAT, under Lieutenant Cordell Mercado, while I awaited the results of my FBI background check for the upgraded clearance. About 6 months later, I was called into the Office of the Chief of Staff of Naval Intelligence. I was asked to read the regulations covering the Personal Reliability Program, covering those personnel who had access to nuclear weapons. Information on nuclear weapons, launch codes, and various other things having to do with nuclear weapons or anything that came under HQCR 44. I was asked to read and then sign a security oath, which I did. I was then told by Captain Caldwell that my security clearance had been upgraded to top secret. Q, sensitivity, compartmentalized information with access authorized on a strict need-to-know basis. He told me to report to the officer in charge of the CINCP-ACFLT Intelligent Briefing Team. The following morning at 0400 hours, I did. What I learned during the time I spent with that briefing team is what led me on my 18-year search that has culminated in the writing of this book. I was later given another upgraded clearance in the crypto category and served as a designated SpecCat operator when I was on watch in the command center. There's him right there at his little naval commendation medal. On the day that I learned that the Office of Naval Intelligence had participated in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and that it was the Secret Service agent driving the limo that had shot Kennedy in the head, I went AWOL with no intention of ever returning. My good friend Bob Swan is the one who talked me into going back. Later, on June 1st, 1972, the eve of my wedding, I told Bob everything that I knew about the UFOs, Kennedy's assassination, the Navy, the secret government, the coming Ice Age, Alternatives 1, 2, and 3, Project Galileo, and the plan for the New World Order. I believed it was all true then, and I believe that it is all true now. I must warn you, however, that I have found evidence that the secret societies were planning as far back as 1917 to invent an artificial threat from outer space in order to bring humanity together in a one-world government, which they call the New World Order. I am still searching for the truth. I firmly believe that this book is closer to the truth than anything that has been previously written. I attempted to leak information to a reporter after my discharge. I was forced off of a cliff by a black limo in the hills of Oakland. 2 men got out and climbed down to where I lay covered in blood. One bent down and felt for my carotid pulse. The other asked if I was dead. The nearest man said no, but he will be. The other replied, good, then we don't have to do anything else. They climbed up and drove off. I succeeded in climbing up the bank, where I waited until found. A month later, I was forced into another accident by the same limo. This time I was to lose my leg. 2 men visited me in the hospital. They only wanted to know if I would shut up or if the next time would be final. I told them that I would be a very good little boy, that they needn't worry about me anymore. Under my breath, I swore to spill the beans as soon as I could figure out how to do it without getting hurt again. It took me 16 years, $27,000, a computer, and a lot of envelopes, but now everyone knows. Almost. I went back to school after leaving the Navy and obtained a degree in photography. Served as the chief instructor of the Coastal School of Deep Sea Diving, the head of the Mixed Gas Deep Saturation Diving Department, and the underwater photography instructor for the College of Oceaneering. Admissions representative for Airco Technical Institute, assistant director of Adelphi Business College, executive director of Adelphi Business College, national marketing coordinator of United Education and Software, executive director of Pacific Coast Technical Institute, and executive director of National Technical College. I also owned and operated Absolute Image Gallery and Studio of Fine Art Photography. In the spring of 1988, I saw a magazine that made reference to a document discovered by the research team of Moore, Shandera, and Friedman that outlined the government's knowledge of a down saucer, dead alien bodies, and an operation called Majestic 12. I knew that Moore and Friedman were government agents, and the document was a fraud. I had never heard of Shandera. I knew this because I had seen a list of agents who were to initiate a contingency plan called Majestic that would lead investigators off the track when such a need arose. I decided that it was a time for me to enter the arena and expose the cover-up and the disinformation. First, it was necessary to convince the known agents that I was just a kook who didn't really know anything. I prepared some bogus information, mixed it with some true information, and passed it to Moore and Friedman through Jim Spicer, the operation of computer BBS network called Paranet. Spicer was told that the information was to go only to Moore or Friedman. No one else was to see it. I wanted to buy time by convincing these agents to report me to their case officers as harmless, thus allowing me to get the real information out to the public. None of that information was intended to go to the public. Spicer turned out to be working with Moore, however, and posted the files on the computer networks. Spicer then went to Los Angeles, conferred with Moore for 3 days, then returned and barred me from the Paranet system. Friedman called and elicited my address, the name and address of my employer, and a lot of other personal information. I knew that I was being checked out through the intelligence network and played along. About 1 week after talking to Friedman, 2 Defense Investigative Service agents showed up at my home and confiscated all my floppy disks. The only thing that prevented them from taking my computer was the fact that it was an XT with no hard drive. I knew that my plan had worked because they didn't take me. With the help of Annie and a few very close and trusted friends, I prepared the real information as true and correct as I could remember, and together we did a mailing that all total cost me $27,000. We sent the packages to people all over the world. That is what prevented the government from arresting me or harming me. Any move by them would be interpreted as total confirmation of everything that I had revealed. I also uploaded the information onto computer bulletin boards across the nation. At the same time, I publicly stated that Moore, Shandera, and Friedman are government agents and that the Eisenhower briefing document is a fraud. I was attacked by everyone. They insisted that Moore, Shandera, and Friedman were above reproach. I resigned effective April 15th, 1989. That was 4 days after I was born. From the college where I was at the executive director after Jamie Shandera was seen poking around the grounds. That story is included later in this book. The loss of income was a serious blow. Stan Barrington, the head of the college security department, came to our aid. Stan gave us $5,000 to help out. I was deeply moved by his faith and trust in me, and so I gave him 24% of whatever was to come out of my efforts down the line. Neither of us ever expected much, and so far we have not been wrong. I have, however, paid Stan back his money, and now whatever he earns is extra. Stan is in charge of printing information and the sale of my papers and tapes. Stan Barrington is my only authorized representative. Moore was proved to be an agent when, by his own admission on July 1st of 1989, he stated that he had participated in spying on fellow researchers, had changed documents, had put out disinformation, and had helped run a scam on Paul Bennewix. That had resulted in Mr. Bennewix being confined to a mental institution. Moore stated that he had been recruited by an intelligence agency and that he knew he had been recruited. He was a witting agent. No one acknowledged that I had been right. From that point on, my Annie and I were followed and harassed. Death threats began showing up on our answering machines. The phone would ring several times during the night, but no one would reply when we answered. Sometimes a man would deliver another death threat. Sometimes government cars would park in front and well-dressed men watched the house. The strangest people began to show up at our door, sometimes in the middle of the night. I purchased a .380 automatic for Annie and a 9mm for me. I taught Annie how to shoot, and she will not hesitate to kill anyone who attempts to harm me, her, or our little daughter. Annie and Pooh, Dorothy's nickname, are the lights in my life. Annie and I were married on July 4th, 1989, and Pooh was born on May 30th, 1990. My most touching memory of Annie is of the time after 12 hours of labor when we were finally in the delivery room. She had taken no drugs, she had not been given a spinal tap, she did everything naturally. She was drained of energy and was experiencing great pain. She was numb. After a really hard push, she looked up at me with all the innocence and trust of a little child and asked, "Did the baby come yet?" It was very hard for me to tell her that her baby had not been born yet, but that is what I said. She seemed to waver for a moment, but only a moment. Annie quickly regained her composure, and I could see the love in her eyes as she looked up at me. I squeezed her hand. She took a deep breath and pushed Pooh's little head out into the world. The doctor suctioned the baby's mouth, and then Annie gave her all, a push that seemed to come from her very soul, and a little Dorothy popped out, announcing her presence with a great cry. I'm so proud of Annie. She is my hero, and Pooh is my always and forever friend. He's a really cute little, I'm sorry, get it, little picture of them. Like, oh, look at them, so cute. At one point, I became very upset with the intimidation. I went out to the government car at the curb. I showed the man in the car my 9mm pistol and told him that we were fed up with their intimidating tactics. I told him that if he or anyone else wanted to know something about me, they should come to the house, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and I would be happy to tell them anything that they wanted to know. I informed him that if any further attempt was made to harass me or my family, I would not hesitate to use my pistol. I then walked behind his car, wrote down the driver's license number. He started the car, drove off, and we have not detected any overt signs of surveillance since that day. They did not give up on us. No one knew the location of our new house when we moved to Arizona. However, when we drove into the driveway, a government car showed up right behind us. The man got out and said he was lost and wanted to know who lived here. I asked him why he wanted to know. He stated that he was a census taker. He said it was his job to ensure that no one out here in the country was left out of the census. He asked my name, and I told him to get off my property and not to ever come back. He protested, but left when he saw that I was serious. I merely asked Andy to get my pistol out of the car. Now, many people would say that I was paranoid in this instance, until they discover that census takers do not drive government cars. Bill Cooper knows. I was at the post office one morning when a county sheriff's deputy asked the clerk at the window, next to the one where I was buying stamps, if William Cooper had rented a box. I smiled as the clerk handed him my rental agreement, and he copied the information. He didn't learn anything, as we live in the country where there are no addresses. The form had only Stolen Boulevard listed. A lot of people live on Stolen Boulevard. We have been taken advantage of by every crooked con man, TV producer, scriptwriter, author, and flim-flam expert that there is in this country. I have learned that the TV and media reporters and producers that I have met are a pack of liars. They are not objective. They don't give a damn about the truth. The only really open media left to the public is talk radio. And even talk radio won't discuss certain subjects. My material has been copied, changed, and even plagiarized. A lot of people have used my material to make money without my knowledge or permission. A Hollywood producer wanted to buy the exclusive rights to my story for $1. Bill Hamilton begged me to let him include my material in his book entitled Alien Magic. He pretended to be a friend and I let him. I asked for no money and he offered none. His entire book consists of other people's material. He now accuses me of stealing his information. Bill Hamilton turned out to be just another UFO flake. I have since learned that I am not the only person of whom he has taken advantage. The most dangerous scam was perpetrated by two old has-been actors turned conmen, named Michael Callan and Douglas Dean. I doubt seriously that you will remember either. Callan was a regular in the cheapy teen beach-blanketed movies, and Dean never got beyond bit parts and chorus lines. I got involved with them when another actor named Bruce Reed called and asked if I would consent to meet with him and a friend who preferred to remain anonymous. I agreed that they could come to the house where we could talk on familiar turf. I was not eager to meet with someone that I did not know, and especially with an anonymous person away from familiar surroundings. Reed and friend showed up at my home, and the friend turned out to be Michael Callan. They told me that they had read my material and wanted to help. What a joke that statement turned out to be. They told me that they knew how to get me in front of millions of people where I could deliver my message. Callan was slick. He told me he was only interested in helping spread the information, but talked me into signing a 5-year management contract that gave him a full 20% of the gross of all of my earnings, no matter what the source. He swore that if he didn't show results within 6 months, he would tear up the contract. The first thing that Callan did was shaft his partner, Bruce Reed. He cut Reed out of the action, to prevent me from finding out that he had done it, only to get Reed's half of the 20%. Callan told me that Bruce was a drug dealer. Callan said that the public would find out eventually, and Reed's drug involvement would damage me. Everything Callan told me about Reed turned out to be a lie. Stan Barrington called me next, wanting to know why I was trying to dump him. I didn't know what he was talking about. It turned out that Callan was trying to force Stan into giving up his 24% so that Callan could form a 50-50 partnership with me. I told Stan that I had no intention of dumping him. I told him that his 24% was his, and that he could keep it, sell it, or give it away, and that he did not need my permission. Stan felt much better after that conversation and told Callan to go fly a kite. At that point, Callan began working on me to get rid of Stan. I refused. I also told him that he had nothing invested and therefore did not warrant anything. His job was to manage according to our contract. Douglas Dean entered the picture at the January 7, 1989 lecture that I gave at the Showboat Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Callan brought him to videotape the lectures so that we would have a tape to sell for those thousands of people who pleaded with us to produce a tape. The agreement was that he would tape the event and the tapes would belong exclusively to me. In return, if the tapes turned out good, Dean would get a contract to produce future tapes. The tapes were terrible, and I told both Dean and Callan that I did not want tapes of that poor quality being sold to anyone. They did it anyways behind my back and began the process of stealing my master tapes from all of my other lectures. At the same time, Callan drained all the business accounts. He borrowed $1,400 from Stan to produce tapes and then kept the money and the tapes. A producer in Germany booked me to do a lecture in that country. To secure the agreement, he sent $3,000 to be used for first 2-class tickets and as a guarantee that when I got there, I would not be canceled. The producer canceled when a German postal strike prevented him from advertising the event. Callan kept the man's $3,000. I didn't find out about that until after I until after I fired Callan. At my lecture in San Diego, at the Whole Life Expo, I found out that Dean was selling tapes and asking people to make checks out to Need to Know Productions, a phony company. I immediately fired Dean. I informed Callan that we were to do no more business with him whatsoever. I discovered that Callan was telling me that we were having tapes duplicated in Hollywood for $15 per tape, but in reality, Dean was doing it on VCRs at his home in Arizona. I asked Callan to return all my master tapes for all my lectures. He refused, and I fired him. When I got rid of Callan, he had stolen everything that we had. We were literally left penniless. He was in possession of all of our master tapes from all of my lectures. We were broke and homeless at that point. If it had not been for a few good friends in Minnesota, we would not have survived. We would be in the streets today. Callan and Dean continue to injure us by selling tapes from my lectures. We get nothing from those sales. They are the most despicable con men and thieves that you can imagine. I paid a visit to Dean's home one Saturday morning to ask him for my master tapes. He was not home, and after a polite conversation with his handyman, I returned to my home. A few days later, the sheriff's department called and asked me if I had been to Dean's home that same Saturday. I told them that I had. He asked me if I had tried to break into Dean's home, and I told him I had not. He thanked me, and that was the end of it. I had no idea what it was all about until I was served with a restraining order. It seems that Dean's guilty conscience had made him afraid that I would return. He slit his own tires, made a report to the sheriff that I had done it, and then procured a restraining order from the local court. I have never been questioned or accused by the police or sheriff other than what I have already disclosed. I believe that their goal from the very beginning was to try and destroy my efforts at educating the American people. They damn near succeeded. That is the end of our foreword, ladies and gentlemen. So next will be Chapter 1, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. A copy furnished by Mr. Tom Young, a fellow warrior in the cause of freedom. Excerpts printed word for word, exactly as discovered, with added comments and emphasis added by William Cooper. So I will start this next, but I have to work on finishing and editing this because I don't have enough memory on the iPad. I already had to reread a couple parts because I didn't save it and I had to go move things. It was a pain in the butt. Anywho, though, so I will be continuing this hopefully daily. If not, it will definitely be within a few days of each other, depending on how long it takes to do the editing, because these are a lot of information to break down and put in. So Chapter 1 is next. Let me know if there's anything I should do differently when I'm, doing each chapter, reading, etc., because I've never read aloud to people before. So if I'm going too fast or anything, any feedback is appreciated. Anyways, guys, I hope you have enjoyed. I hope that I enunciated well. And I probably butchered some names. I apologize. But that is the whole beginning. We're a hunk in. Not that big of a hunk, but comparatively, but that's the foreword. The foreword's like, 35 pages. Anyways, guys, I will continue on this for you. I'm going to try to go get this edited so I can get it put up today. So that way I can start Chapter 1 tomorrow. See you later.